Good afternoon, everyone. I think we can start now. Uh, Welcome to the final day of Bay of Bengal Regional Integration Capacity Building Program organized by SANEM and the Asia Foundation. Today we have two sessions. The first session titled Trade, Investment and BIMSTEC will be conducted by Dr. Selim Rehan sir. Dr. Selim Rehan is a professor at Department of Economics, University of Dhaka, and the Executive Director of SANEM. He holds a PhD from University of Manchester, United Kingdom. He is an honorary senior research fellow at the University of Manchester and the member of board of directors in Global Development Network. Professor Raihan possesses vast expertise in empirical research on international trade, economic growth, poverty, labor market, macroeconomic policies, political economy, and the climate change issues. Has also worked in several national and international organizations, including the Asian Development Bank, World Bank, UNDP, UNSCEP, and ILO. Professor Raihan has published numerous journal articles, books, book chapters, and working papers. He is the editor of Thinking Aloud, monthly digest of SANEM. He regularly writes columns in the leading English and Bengali dailies in Bangladesh. Now, I would like to request Dr. Selim Rehan sir to start the session. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Takrim Firdaus Shurid, and welcome the participants once again. As Shurid mentioned, this is the final day of our 3-day capacity building program on BIMSTEC, and more importantly, I think it is on the regional integration issues. So today I'm going to present to you trade and investment issues in BIMSTEC or broader context of South Asia. And then there will be the final session will be conducted by Dr. Bishwajit Nag. He's the professor at the Indian Institute of Foreign Trade, and he'll be talking about the macroeconomic issues in the BIMSTEC region. So let me then start my presentation. I am going to share. Okay. Share screen option. Can you see my screen, Shurid?
Yes, sir.
I'll put it into the PowerPoint slideshow. Let me do it. Okay, so in the next 30-35 minutes, or probably a little bit more than that, I'll be talking about the prospects and challenges of trade and investment in BIMSTEC. So let me just to kind of reorient our ideas about the importance of regional cooperation. Since the presentation or the discussion is on BIMSTEC, but in the broader context, there are important issues related to the important significance related to regional cooperation. The first is, of course, economic growth and development. There are debates in trade theories, of course, and since I teach international trade, to what extent regional integration contributes to welfare gain of the member countries. And if you take the views of this partial equilibrium analysis of Jacob Weiner's, this trade creation and trade diversion effect, if trade creation exceeds trade diversion, there is a net welfare gain. And if that doesn't happen, the opposite happens, then there is a net welfare loss of the participating country in any trade kind of group, like whether it's FTA or customs CDM. But overwhelmingly, the global studies have shown that the trade creation effect can be larger than the trade diversion effect. That means countries can actually gain out of this regional cooperation. And one thing I'd really like to mention here, that while we in trade theory, we talk about this Jacob Weiner's analysis, which is actually a partial equilibrium analysis, and it fails to take into account the general equilibrium effect. So that means when you take into account the general equilibrium effect of any trade agreement or regional cooperation, and also if you take into account the dynamic effects, in contrast, Jacob Weiner's analysis was very much static, then overwhelmingly studies have shown that if regional cooperation can be rightly designed, that it can lead to greater prosperity of the member countries. So here, I would say that there is an opportunity for gain in economic growth. And of course, when you talk about this larger development perspective, when you talk about development, it's not only economic growth, but also human development in terms of elevation of poverty, development of human capital, health and education, and various other fronts. So this is something, one important area which need to be emphasized when you talk about this importance of regional cooperation. Then sustainable development. This is something coming up very strongly with the discourse of SDGs. And there are, I would say, and actually, probably that is probably is part of my concluding statement, but I want to highlight it here, that we all agree that the regional cooperation experience in South Asia or even in the BIMSTEC has not been that great. So we have not been able to actually fulfill some of the potentials which this regional cooperation could offer. But one ray of hope I see that, and that's what, as I said, is probably my part of my concluding observation, is that when it comes to SDGs, all the countries, they have commitment to attain SDGs. So when we struggle to find out a common agenda for regional cooperation, in my view, and I have written about this too, that SDGs could be the common framework where all the countries, they have committed. So I think when it comes to sustainable development too, and it covers, we know that it's not only the economic development, but climate change and environmental issues and social development, there are important areas for cooperation and which can actually lead to much larger gains for the countries in this region. And most importantly so is that almost all these countries, they face similar kind of challenges when it comes to environmental and climate change. Then the third point is about the security and stability. This is a kind of a security in the old-fashioned way. It has been, it's more of the security, the national security, the way it has been highlighted in many of the security documents or, even many of the literature in this region, which highlighted the security more from this military perspective or national security from that perspective. But increasingly, security is now redefined. We talk about economic security. We talk about broader developmental security, like whether the people of a country, they are more secured in terms of economic prosperity, or security in the sense that whatever development the country has achieved, whether that is going to sustain in the future, or there are risk factors which can undermine some of the successes the countries have achieved. So so security doesn't really need to be defined in a very narrow sense. But you remember, I think that's something I will also probably mention in one of my slides later on, that the whole idea of regional cooperation in many parts of the world came firstly from reducing the conflicts among the neighboring countries. Because if you take the example of European Union, where after Second World War, all kinds of efforts were there so that the countries, they don't engage themselves with another Third World War or any kind of conflicts, which actually during the Second World War, the whole Europe was devastated, infrastructure and many other things. But so if you see the many plans or activities or initiatives after Second World War in Europe, it was very much on how to cooperate with each other and rebuild not only a single country, but the whole continent as a whole. So that's something we also see in South Asia. The emergence of SAARC in the late 70s and early 80s, one of the important issues which was discussed, that to reduce conflict, reduce kind of even military conflicts, which this region witnessed in a very limited period of time. Of war after 1947, and then there was the war in 65, and then 71, and then later on. So all these things can lead to, if the countries can collaborate, that can lead to reduced risk factors, which can actually endanger the security. And as I mentioned earlier, that the security needs to be redefined as well, and the stability which comes with that too. To what extent we have been successful in doing that, that is probably I'd also like to hear from me during the Q&A session. Then infrastructural development, and it is increasingly now being understood that when it comes to infrastructure, then there is a kind of economies of scale that the countries need to enjoy out of it. So a smaller country, you can build infrastructure within the country, but in order to enjoy the economies of scale of that infrastructural development, you need to cooperate or integrate with other countries. The best example is probably the Matarbari seaport in Bangladesh. And studies have shown that, we also have done some studies that the kind of infrastructure, the kind of scale of that Matarbari deep seaport Bangladesh is developing, and we are hopeful that it will be realized or it will come into operation in the coming years soon, then only Bangladesh will not be able to enjoy the full scale of it. So if we could allow northeastern India, Myanmar, even Thailand, even China, and that would actually allow Bangladesh to enjoy the full economic scale and the efficiency of operating this infrastructure in a more successful way. So, and also you have seen that the countries, when they develop the national infrastructure, so on the other side of the border, there is no kind of matching effort. And that also leads to, the blockage factor of regional cooperation. And that is very much common in South Asia, when it comes to border, the trade across borders, because most of the trade in South Asia among the South Asian countries, it actually happens through land borders. And we see the lack of infrastructure development. So this also highlights the importance of regional cooperation. Finally, about this culture and social exchange, I think this relates to more of people-to-people contact. And you know that in the BIMSTEC, one important aspect is to have people-to-people contact and how to engage with this culture and social exchange more, so that it can reduce what you call these the kind of risk factors for conflicts. And it can also enhance the kind of trust among the countries, and especially the people in these countries. And there have been mentioning about one particular factor, this is called the trust deficit among the countries in South Asia as well as in BIMSTEC, which inhibits the larger cooperation among these countries. So I think this is also very, very important. So my question is that whether, I think I already have posed this question, whether BIMSTEC is realizing its full potential. It is not is realizing its full potential, despite that it has a huge opportunities to gain out of many things, if the countries can collaborate with each other. And that is very much true for the SAARC region as well. So from SAARC to BIMSTEC, that's a kind of interesting dynamics, is that in the SAARC process, despite that there are countries which have they have bilateral tensions and conflicts, but SAARC was formed in the early 80s, and then in the subsequent decades, SAARC actually achieved certain things, especially in 2004, SAFTA was signed, and by 2006, SAFTA was South Asian Free Trade Area, started to operationalized. But then we see the kind of deadlock in SAARC, and very much it's now something in a state where not many people are hopeful about SAARC's future. So when there was a kind of frustration in the SAARC process because of bilateral political relation of some countries, then BIMSTEC appeared as a kind of alternative that, okay, some countries are not, they are in SAARC, they are not in BIMSTEC, so probably BIMSTEC would not have that kind of experience of bilateral tension. But despite that, BIMSTEC did not fly. So we don't really see that kind of much success in BIMSTEC. BIMSTEC took more than 30 years to come up with a charter. So that means this progress, very slow progress in BIMSTEC, that also raises a lot of question that whether the kind of experience what we had SAARC, whether BIMSTEC could make a meaningful departure out of that, and it could not. But despite these things, I would say that there are hopes and there are some initiatives, if some we out of if they can be materialized to some extent, I think there we will start seeing some benefits out of it. But I would say that as my conclusion here would be that the looking at the kind of common experience of SARC and BIMSTEC, there is a combined failure in South Asia. So these 5 South Asian countries, they're in BIMSTEC. So it's a combined failure of the South Asian countries. So when you compare South Asia or BIMSTEC with the Southeast Asian countries, the kind of cooperation they developed, not in terms of trade, but also investment, uh, developing the regional value chain, the success in interregional trade, that is something also remarkable in our just next door neighbor, where we were not able to do that. So even the members of ASEAN, Thailand and Myanmar, they had much larger success while they are the member of ASEAN, but they have very least success while they are member of BIMSTEC. So we need to have some deep dive political economy analysis of why that happened. So probably that is one question, is that whether the appetite for integration weak in South Asia, and what are the kind of factors. So probably that's something I have just raised this question. We can discuss it later. These are more of a kind of questions within a political economic framework. But I think let's look at the more of the kind of trade landscape in BIMSTEC. So as I think I've already talked about these opportunities. There's a growing market in BIMSTEC countries. You see that the population of over 1.5 billion. Some of these countries are growing fast, so that shows that there's an opportunity. The strategic location of Bay of Bengal and BIMSTEC has been highlighted quite strongly in many studies. Then digital trade, increased digital connectivity offers new avenues for trade in service and e-commerce. We are not talking only about trade in goods, but increasingly services trade are becoming more and more important. And the future outlook, especially whether if there would be a successful FTA being signed, and then when it links with all kinds of connectivity and various other economic cooperation, then there are huge opportunities. So this is the table. This is the very latest data on this intra-BIMSTEC trade. And this table I developed using the trade map data of ITC. And you can see that if I want to take that time. Okay. So if you see that, so this table is constructed in a way, this is the export data. So how much Bangladesh is exporting to Bhutan? So this is a $10 million. So this is how much Bangladesh is exporting to India, $1.8 billion. So if you go by this line, the country, how much they're exporting to other country. So this is and then finally, this is the total export to the BIMSTEC region. And this is the % share of total export in as the country exports to the world. So 3.92 is the % share of BIMSTEC export in total Bangladeshi export to the world. That means Bangladesh exports around 4% to the BIMSTEC countries. And 96% of its Bangladesh exports actually outside of the BIMSTEC region. But this parenthesis number, it shows what was the figure in 1990. It shows some improvement, definitely. In 1990, Bangladeshi export share was only 1.66. And then you see that it has increased to 3.92. And then similarly, you can see for Bhutan, India, Myanmar, Nepal, Sri Lanka, and Thailand. So some of you, for some of you, probably this table will be very, very useful. But you will also see that in this case, the largest exporter is, of course, India in the inter-regional, which makes sense, and then followed by Thailand. So these are the 2 largest exporters, and they have larger export capacity, whereas not other countries, they are coming close to that. While you can see some bilateral numbers are big, and especially with India. So with India, all the countries, you can see the bilateral trade high, and to some extent with Thailand as well. But not when you take out Thailand, then you will see that other countries, they are not trading much with themselves. So that means the bilateral level, especially with India, the trade is high, but the interregional trade in this BIMSTEC is not that really big. So I think I have already talked about this total trade and the key partners. But let's look at this trend in interregional trade. And this data is taken from Dr. Probit, this one working paper, which is published in the UNESCO. And compared to 2000 in 2019, probably this paper was published in 2021. So that's why the data is up to 2019. But I don't think a major shift has really occurred. Probably there would be some additions after, if you take the 2023 data. But it shows that there is an increasing trend in terms of the total interregional trade in US billion, and between 2010 and 2019, it actually almost doubled. And also you can see that the percent of trade, of interregional trade, in total trade, that also increased. But despite that this 7.2% or around 7% of interregional trade share is very, very low compared to what we observe in the case of ASEAN, or, in ASEAN, it is in the range of 25%, their interregional trade share. In European Union, it is around close to 55 to 60%. And even some of the interregional trade, what we observe in Latin America or Africa, the trade share, the interregional trade share is much higher than what we have observed in the BIMSTEC. So despite that, there we see some progress, but the progress remained slow. So that is something, one important observation we can see it from here. So why this interregional trade low? I think first let's talk about some of these technical issues. High tariff rates and para tariffs. So when it comes to interregional trade, some of the countries, they still maintain high tariff rates. So for example, interestingly, India gives duty-free market access to LDCs and South Asian LDCs in Bangladesh, and Bangladesh has been enjoying it from 2011. Under India-Nepal FTA agreement and under India-Bhutan trade agreement, Bhutan and Nepal also receives duty-free market access in India. So when it comes to these three countries, they actually have larger market access in India, but not in other countries. So Shiva, you raised a hand. Yes, Shiva, you want to say something? Any question at this moment? You want to say something, Shiva? Or you post a question on the chat box? Okay, if you have any question, you can type it. Probably I can mention it after the presentation is over. So the tariff rates that when it comes to the LDCs, they enjoy probably larger market access in India, but not in other countries in the BIMSTEC region, not in Thailand, not even when it comes to their Bangladesh getting in India and Nepal's market, Nepal getting its Bangladesh's market. Because when it comes to average tariff rate, Bangladesh and Nepal actually stands very high in terms of average tariff rate in this region. So this is probably, that means when it comes to proper enhancement of interregional trade by liberalizing tariff rate or reducing the tariff rates, that's something. Tariff remains still a big concern. And more importantly, the para tariffs, some of these tariff rates, which are, the WTO, they have defined some of the tariff rates like supplementary duties, regulatory duties, different kinds of additional taxes. Bangladesh employs quite a lot of it, which are, if Bangladesh, when graduates us from the LDC status in 2026, and Nepal is also going to be the same, going to have the same experience, these para tariffs will be under serious WTO scrutiny. So this is also important concern. That tariff is still remain an important concern when it comes to promoting interregional trade. But I think more importantly, apart from the tariff, these non-tariff issues are becoming more and more prominent. And there are various forms of non-tariff measures, starting from import licensing and standard regulations, customs procedures, technical barriers to trade, sanitary and phytosanitary measures, different kinds of trade limits like countervailing duties, anti-dumping duties, which some of these countries they're already experiencing in while exporting to other countries. Rules of origin, and then various other issues. So here, I would like to mention that one of the important studies which actually I undertook in South Asia, especially among the SASEC countries, not all South Asian countries, where with the help of the Asian Development Bank, actually I led a team where there were 6 country studies in South Asia. We looked into very detailed non-tariff measures these countries employ or impose while importing from other member countries. And it shows that there's significant presence of these non-tariff issues. And unless these non-tariff issues are not addressed properly, then this trade would not really increase. So when it comes to non-tariff issues, one cautionary note I'd like to mention here is that not all non-tariff measures are illegitimate. There are some legitimate non-tariff measures too. For example, under sanitary phytosanitary measures or technical barriers to trade, you'll find many legitimate standard-related non-tariff measures which the countries must comply. But when the procedural issues becomes very complicated in order to meet those non-tariff measures, then it shows that actually some of these non-tariff measures may turn into serious non-tariff barriers. So that also is been identified by various studies that in South Asia, the non-tariff barriers, because of very complicated procedural issues, that some of the legitimate non-tariff measures are actually turning into non-tariff barriers. So this is also an important area of concern, as I have mentioned. Also, this high trade cost, and some of you who were very interested in running a gravity model or looking at how trade costs affect trade. South Asian BIMSTEC is a very well, I would say, area for investigation. Infrastructural gaps, various forms of regulatory barriers, limited market access. I have already talked about this tariff and non-tariff issues. Some kind of political instability. Some of these countries that are already experiencing political instability, and some kind of small market size, especially if there is not much economies of scale, that can also lead to a rising cost. So this high trade cost leads to low trade. So even some studies have shown that when it comes to trade cost, the trade cost between Bangladesh and USA is probably lower than the trade cost between Bangladesh and India or Bangladesh and Nepal. So this is something a very interesting area to investigate, that unless these issues are solved at the bilateral level, at the regional level, then this will also act as a significant barrier for enhancing trade among these countries. So we talk about quite a lot about this trade facilitation these days, especially the whole idea of trade facilitation would be to reduce the trade cost and facilitate the infrastructure or environment for trade, and which includes customs efficiency, harmonization, especially harmonization of policies, different kinds of standards and procedures. You know that there is a South Asian standard organization, is SATSO, which has a headquarters in Bangladesh. The whole idea of establishing SATSO was that to harmonize some of these standards and procedure when it comes to testing and different kinds of meeting these non-tariff measures in trade among South Asian countries. But if you look at the progress of this, unfortunately, the progress has remained very, very low. So this is also, I would say, a very important area where to improve trade facilitation, reduce trade cost, we need to look at this harmonization of policies and procedures. Insufficient regional cooperation, like, especially when it comes to joint customs procedures and several other initiatives where you can actually reduce the procedural steps by adopting some collaborative efforts that is also not being seen, in this region. Uh, I give you one example. We know that in Second World War, to what Germany and France, how they fought against each other in the Second World War, and even in the First World War, you would see that. But they left that experience long back. In Bangladesh, they have the embassy, and they have the embassy in the same office, just in the same building, same floor. One side is German and the other side is French. So why did they want to do that? Because they want to reduce the kind of cost and also the kind of joint effort that they established a single office. So I think this is something which has been discussed, that at the border checkpost, the customs procedures, probably a joint office could be established where you don't really need to go through the same process while transporting goods from one side of the border to the other side of the border. Then the capacity issue is also a very important issue. Many member countries, they require assistance in building their capacity for effective trade facilitation and upgrading infrastructure. And there are several cross-border trade issues, such as inadequate border facilities and security concerns lead to delays and increased cost. There is a BIMSTEC master plan for transport connectivity. And actually, the master plan was formally adopted at the 5th BIMSTEC summit held in Colombo, Sri Lanka, on 13 March 2022. But again, there's been a very slow progress in actually implementing it, in getting this, what was signed on paper, to translate it into action. So there is a long way to go, still a long way to go, to have this master plan of transport connectivity. Just to highlight what are the major exports and imports in the BIMSTEC. Bangladesh, we all know that Bangladesh is champion in textile and garments. In Bhutan, electricity, metals, chemical products. India has a little bit more diversified export basket. Pharmaceuticals, machinery, chemicals, Myanmar, agriculture products, natural gas, minerals. Nepal, iron, steel, knotted carpets, textiles. Sri Lanka, tea, textile apparels, rubber and rubber products. Thailand, electronics, automobiles, and various food processing as well. So you can see that some countries, they have some diverse export baskets, especially I would say India and Thailand, and more manufacturing content is there too. Bangladesh, despite that, its export, more than 90% of export actually occupies the manufacturing export. But despite that, the export basket is heavily concentrated. And also, you can see some other countries, even Bhutan, Nepal, their export basket, even if they're probably a bit more diversified than what Bangladesh has, but the products are not, when it comes to more complex products, if you know this, the economic complexity, idea of economic complexity, not much complex products they have been able to produce. So here also, I think it's very important that whether the countries, they are able to diversify and upgrade their export basket so that they can enjoy the much larger opportunities and gains which would be offered to them and out of this regional integration process. The imports, we can see that there is a import of machinery, electronics, raw materials from each other. That is very much the case, where India has become, and Thailand also become, the major source of import for most of these countries. We talk about this FTA, BIMSTEC FTA, which has been discussed for long, but still the success has not been, we haven't seen signed FTA, BIMSTEC FTA. So this is also, it shows that there are, despite that this has been negotiated or talked for more than 2 decades, the success has not been seen among these countries. And but also we know that there's 5 members of the BIMSTEC, they're also member of SAFTA, and also the South Asian countries, they have bilateral FTAs. I already talked about some of the bilateral trade agreements between the South Asian countries. But also in the BIMSTEC, there are some sectoral cooperation like trade, investment, services, which can also boost economic collaboration. So concerns, so there are some important concerns. One particular concerns of smaller and weaker economies. Bangladesh is in Nepal, and especially after the LDC graduation. And we know that the duty-free market access, I have already talked about that in India, that when it comes to LDC graduation for Bangladesh and Nepal, then the kind of one-sided I would say the trade preference what these two countries are enjoying in India, that is not going to be there unless Bangladesh and Nepal they get with India with a kind of or full FTA agreement. But again, there are issues, as I mentioned, that the smaller and weaker economies, because they have a couple of concerns. One is that revenue concern. If you look at Bangladesh and Nepal's total revenue generation, I think to some extent that will also be applicable to some other South Asian countries too, smaller South Asian countries too, that they're out of the total revenue, government revenue, still custom duties occupy a significant part of it. For Nepal, I know it's very high. For Bangladesh, is in the range of around 30%. So the concern is that if there is an FTA and where one of the major import sources is India, then an FTA can lead to a drastic fall in their revenue generation. So that is one thing. And second concern is about some of its domestic lobbies, especially they want protection because their fears is that they'll not be able to compete with India or Thailand. So these things need to be addressed properly because some of these weaker countries, they need to be treated where if there is a BIMSTEC FTA signed, some of the provisions there should be there for these weaker economies so that they liberalize their tariffs at a slower pace compared to the more advanced countries in this region. I think I talked about the trade facilitation revenue concern. Okay, so I'll not go into that. So smaller country fear, that is very much that is not only unique in this region, that is seen in many other parts of the world too. So the larger country role is more important, especially the role of India and Thailand to offer more kind of benefits or preferences to the smaller economies that will build more confidence for integration in this region. And another important thing is this low inter-regional investment. So countries, despite that, two major investors in this region, India and Thailand, they invest quite a lot outside of this region, but not within this region. So, and it's not only their fault, but also the host countries, they also have their problems. For example, Bangladesh, we haven't been able to attract, let alone the FDI from India or Thailand, but not from many other countries. The potential investors, they see that the country, Bangladesh, is not yet ready to offer the right kind of facilities for the foreign investors, given the fact that there are high cost of doing business here. There are infrastructural gaps and various other rules and regulations and bureaucratic process are not really still very favorable for foreign investors. So those things need to be looked at very seriously. So very quickly, I'll just highlight some of the investment opportunities. Of course, infrastructural development, I talked about this. One is that just transportation, infrastructure, especially developing the transportation sector, different kinds of connectivity. If the BIMSTEC master plan of connectivity starts operationalizing, then definitely there would be need for enhanced investment in this connectivity process. Urban development, most of these BIMSTEC countries, urbanization is rapid urbanization we are observing. So that will also require larger demand for, or we'll see larger demand for smart city projects, housing and urban infrastructure. Then energy, this is an important area and very, I would say, critical area in the area of in the energy, especially in the case of renewable energy. We have already seen that countries like India or Thailand or even some other countries, they're investing quite a lot on renewable energy. I was part of some studies, some recent studies where I also tried to look at what is the prospect of cross-border renewable energy. But still, I think there is a long way to go. There is a huge prospect, especially hydropower. We know that Nepal and Bhutan, there are two major sources of hydropower, but the kind of investment is needed and the kind of trusted environment which is needed to secure that investment, especially depending on not only the bilateral relation of the countries, but also region as a whole or sub-region as a whole, that is still not being seen very clearly. And then I think this cross-border energy too is already happening between Bangladesh, India, between India, Nepal, India, Bhutan, and Thailand, Myanmar to some extent. But I think the potentials are much larger than what is happening now. Agriculture and food processing is extremely important area of investment, even interregional investment, where some countries like Thailand, especially Thailand, they actually have shown that the kind of progress they have made with respect to this agri-tech investment, even in India also, and the food processing, which the other countries can also learn. And there are prospects, we can see that from investment coming from Thailand or India to other countries on this particular area. Tourism, I'm not getting the details, but there are huge opportunities for investment on the tourism sector, with taking into account the region as a whole. And then the information technology and digital services. This is also very, very important. Manufacturing sector, this should also be a major focus of this investment, especially some countries, including Bangladesh, Nepal, they are having the special economic zones where this investment can actually come, and especially in the manufacturing sector, different diverse manufacturing sector, not only the ready-made garments, where both the investor country as well as the recipient country can be benefited. Healthcare and pharmaceuticals, this is also an extremely important area. There are some investment which is actually flowing from one country to another country in terms of healthcare and pharmaceuticals, but the potentials are still very, very high. And the financial services, I think I'll just stop here. But then I think this is something, it comes from one of my forthcoming study, where I try to look at using the GTAP model, that what is the actually impact of this BIMSTEC FTA. And if you consider BIMSTEC FTA and then add some other FTA scenarios, what will be the impact? So here you can see this is the GTAP model. Some of you who are not really aware of this model, it's a global, the GTAP means the Global Trade Analysis Project. This is it's a global general equilibrium model where you can run different kinds of scenarios involving many countries. So using this GTAP model, so this is the first scenario where I run this BIMSTEC FTA, and you can see the countries, their impact on real GDPs, whereas all these countries, they gain out of this BIMSTEC FTA. So what would be the percentage change in their real GDP if these countries, they form, the BIMSTEC countries, they form an FTA. So this is the first BIMSTEC FTA scenario. Then in the second scenario, we added BIMSTEC FTA plus and trade facilitation, if there is some kind of trade facilitation. So here in the model, we assumed a certain reduction in the trade cost, bilateral trade cost. And you can see that actually, interestingly, the gains become larger, much larger when you add this trade facilitation. That means the gains from simply the cutting down the tariff in the FTA, and then if you add trade facilitation with that FTA, then you actually achieve much larger gain in this trade facilitation scenario. Then also another scenario which I also consider is what I call the Greater Asian FTA. There's a kind of visionary Asian FTA where you have this BIMSTEC FTA, you have this SAFTA, you have ASEAN, and then also this Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement. All these countries, if they form an FTA, then also we see a kind of a larger gain. We see a gain, but not exactly the same number as we have this BIMSTEC and trade facilitation. But when it comes to this Greater Asian FTA plus Greater Asian trade facilitation, because Greater Asian trade facilitation, that is also very much discussed, this Trans-Asian railway line, there are also road connectivity, various other things are also being discussed. If they materialize, and then in addition to this FTA, you can also see that the countries, they also gain out of it. So the whole idea of this exercise was that, to what extent FTA, whether FTA is beneficial for the countries, and also whether simple tariff cut would be the more would be that meaningful, or you need to, if you include trade facilitation, then whether that enhances or it leads to larger gains. So same exercise actually shows the export impact. Impacts on the export. The earlier slide was an impact on the GDP, and this is an impact on exports. And you can see that to what extent countries' total export also changes. And actually all these countries, they benefit, but their magnitude of the benefit actually vary from country to country. So now coming closer to my presentation, so actually, what are the challenges? I think I've already talked about the challenges because I showed you that there are prospects of trade and the prospects of trade that can lead to gains. And I have also showed you that there are investment prospects as well. And I have already talked about some of the challenges. But just to summarize, there are many policy and regulatory barriers which need to be overcome. Also, there are important infrastructural gaps. So these two, I would say, very important if you really want to address, or if you really want to reap the benefit or the opportunities which the trade investment landscapes in BIMSTEC can offer. But there are also some of these geopolitical tensions, the bilateral disputes, regional disputes, and some of the extra regional issues, that this region is not only influenced by the bilateral political relation of the member countries. They are also influenced by some of the extra regional players, USA, China, European Union, Japan, and various other countries. They also shape the kind of regional politics or geopolitics, regional politics. Yeah, so this is also something can also very important, and this needs to be taken into consideration while we go for, or we argue for, or we try to design the regional integration process in this region. So I think I have already talked about these political economy issues. I have already talked about this SARC, to what extent it has been successful in reducing conflict, and BIMSTEC, whether that made a true kind of departure. I would say that there are some arguments that whether BIMSTEC can be a replacement of SARC. I don't buy that argument. I think SARC has its own merit, and SARC should actually try to serve that merit. And BIMSTEC can actually be another platform where the whole idea of BIMSTEC was to connect the South Asia with the Southeast Asia. But I think I talked about this bilateral political relations, but also to take this regional integration agenda forward, we need a strong political leadership in BIMSTEC. So some of these very important things which are still missing because we don't see that kind of strong leadership in BIMSTEC to take this agenda forward. Finally, I would argue that this is one article. I have shared that link at the bottom of this slide. So this is what I wrote just a month back, that moving towards a BIMSTEC SEPA, Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement. So I think what the countries should consider, that not only just to go for a simple FTA, but moving towards more comprehensive economic partnership, which includes not only FTA in goods, but also services and the broader investment, trade facilitation, and various other issues. So this is something very important. In that article, I say that how we can move towards, first make some comprehensive feasibility studies, then the strengthen the negotiation mechanism by establishing effective working groups, promoting inclusivity and capacity building, because some of these countries, they have the problems of negotiation capacity. Then, of course, extremely important is the robust engagement in both the public and private sector stakeholders. What are their perspectives? In many cases, there is a kind of perception that the private sector probably they become as a kind of stumbling block for regional cooperation because they want protection. They don't really want to liberalize. But I think some of the things which have actually evolved and changed in the last few decades, we have also seen some dynamic private sector. They also want to engage with the regional partners. They want to explore the markets in the region and beyond the region. So I think this engagement would also be very, very important. And fostering regional cooperation, trust building among member countries, and to create an conducive environment for the successful negotiation and subsequent implementation of the SEPA. This is extremely important, and which is still very, I would say, the countries in this region they are suffering from is called a trust deficit. And for that, they need to engage more, with them amongst themselves, and to learn and then to see the kind and show the kind of leadership that they can actually bring something positive and generate something positive out of this negotiation process. So I'll stop here and look forward to the questions. If there are some already questions there, I can address. And if anyone wants to talk, please feel free. You can raise your hand and also say something or ask any question or make any comment. So that's more than welcome. So I think let's see that there are already some questions. Let me first respond to that. Pialuddin, he wrote, what would BIMSTEC implement a Schengen equivalent agreement for trade and tourism? We can hope for that. Why not? They should try. But I think still a long way to go. I remember in the past we talked about having a SARC visa for the business people and for some of the people. I think there was a SARC visa where if you have this SARC visa, you can actually travel among the SARC countries. So that visa was given to some limited business people and some limited other government officials, other people. But I think that is a very good idea. What Pialuddin mentioned, that if this visa process can be made easier, and that will definitely lead to trade and tourism. So Garul Dhoj Bhujel, he wrote, any question? Kishore Mahavani and Jeffrey, they are both the Asian miracle states that SARC is dysfunctional because the bitter India-Pakistan rivalry prevents any real cooperation. Is BIMSTEC as to the dysfunctional SARC? I think I have already answered to that question, that I don't see BIMSTEC as a replacement of SARC. And also that rivalry, what we have seen in the SARC, there was no reason for that rivalry in BIMSTEC because there was no India-Pakistan kind of relation among the BIMSTEC countries. But still that, BIMSTEC did not fly. So probably the reason is somewhere else, not just simply the bilateral relation. Pialuddin Agis, can you suggest what other industries should Bangladesh switch to if we lose the status? Is, of course, I think we have been talking about this point, extremely important point, that Bangladesh must diversify its export basket. Garments, of course, it has been a great success of garments, and we'd really like to continue that success. But we will not be able to only rely on garments after the graduation from the LEC status. We have to have other sectors, leather, agro-processing, IT, pharmaceuticals, light engineering. These are the very prospective sectors which you should consider. Okay, I will read out some other questions. But before that, Srimali Jairatne, probably would like to ask any question, please. Feel free, unmute and say something. You can't unmute? Shurit?
Sir, we are not hearing her, sir.
Yeah, because she raised hand.
Okay.
Anyway, you just try to communicate with her. I'll read out some other questions.
Sure.
Avanti Aij. So you asked about that. Please discuss the scope and challenge of healthcare service trade between BIMSTEC countries. So how we could collect for data. This is a real challenge. Of course, I think you also mentioned this question in one of the earlier sessions too. The data on the healthcare, bilateral trade data is extremely difficult to find. You can try that WTO link. I think I provided that link. And also probably you can try ITC trade map with looking at the services trade data, whether some of the services trade or the healthcare related trade data you can find. So I will try to explore further, and since we know your email ID, I will try to share with you if I find something like that. I hope that satisfies your. Okay, then Afia, you asked, how do geopolitical tensions, the Bay of Bengal region, affect trade investment within BIMSTEC? Yes, geopolitical, I think towards the end, I mentioned about that in some cases, it becomes a kind of, it make this whole process a hostage. Uh, as we know that it's a very globalized world, the countries, they have bilateral relation with the countries outside of this region. And some of these bilateral relations are not really seen in the same way, other countries, so they're seen very differently. So, and there are tensions. We also see that, for example, India-China, the tension between India and China, that also have some impact on the bilateral relations among these BIMSTEC countries as well. Because some of the BIMSTEC countries, for example, Bangladesh, Nepal, or Sri Lanka, they would consider that we need India and China both for our development process. We don't really want to side with one particular country against another country. But we see that this kind of geopolitical tension would probably would become more and more prominent as we see the rivalry of these big players at both the regional and global level. One important issue probably I can highlight that if you are aware of this new industrial policy, especially countries, they are emphasizing quite a lot on this renewable energy or manufacturing of the semiconductors, where they really are electrical vehicles, where we are seeing the emergence of kind of growing protectionism among the countries, imposing or banning the products of other countries. This new industrial policy will also have some important effects in this regional dynamics, which is still not very clear how it's going to have those kind of effects. But there are some studies and there are some kind of analysis which are showing that it's going to have some important or profound impact in the future. Pialuddin again asked the question, is BIMSTEC potential link between SAARC and ASEAN for I think I have already mentioned that, yes, it is seen that as a connector between South Asia and Southeast Asia. But connector, you need to realize it because the potential is always there. But if we can't really materialize these potentials or opportunities, it will still remain as a simple connector, but will not be able to benefit much out of it. And there are some stumbling blocks too, especially the situation in Myanmar, probably that also prevents kind of larger or seamless connectivity between South Asia and Southeast Asia. And that's something one concern which we really need to take into account in the future. Okay, there is any question? I think one question was mentioned as BIMSTEC is already trade facility agreement in negotiation, same for trade service investment as you suggested. Okay. Could you please clarify? Okay, this is Shiva Shrestha. How can BIMSTEC countries increase compliance with trade facilitation agreements? What are the main non-tariff barriers on it? Okay. So in trade agreements, or even we forget the trade agreements, even one country wants to export to another country in the bilateral trade, this compliance issue is becoming extremely important. Compliance, there are various areas of compliance. Of course, one compliance is that whether you are satisfying some of the requirements related to the standards or several kinds of criteria which you need to qualify to meet some of these parameters related to the sanitary and phytosanitary measures or technical barriers to trade. For example, a fruit juice, if you want to export a fruit juice, whether the fruit juice is actually a fruit juice or it is not a fruit juice, it's just a manufacturer using something which is not, the fruit content is very low, whether it's a fruit drink or fruit juice, or the chemical content which has been used in that fruit juice, whether that is not harmful for human. So all this, I'm just giving a very simple example, but this is becoming more and more important when it comes to trade at the global level, at the bilateral trade. So the compliance is extremely important. So to have this compliance in order, so needs to have capacity need to have proper right kind of capacity of the exporters or the producers. That means the producers of fruit juice, whether they are actually complying with this kind of technical requirements in their production process, in their processing process, whether they are able to comply with it. So that is one important capacity. Second important capacity is that, you can produce anything, but you can claim anything, but someone has to certify you. That means I can claim that this is a fruit juice and it's completely harmless. I'm an exporter, but the country who is taking or importing from me, that country may say that, how do I trust you? That means some organization, an internationally reputed organization or some trusted organization need to certify you. So that is the kind of national certification authority. Like they provide this kind of certification, that the testing certification or different kinds of certification. So the problem is some of the certificates which are issued by this national certification authority may not be accepted by other countries, because the problems may lie with the capacity of the national certification standard organization or certification authority, that the certificates they issue, they don't have the proper testing or laboratory facilities or skilled personnel to provide that kind of certificate. Or maybe some countries may doubt over corruption in the other countries, that these certificates probably they are just, you get these certificates by just bribing the officials. So these kind of things, is also becoming very important. And we have faced that some of the certificates issued by, for example, Bangladesh Standard and Technical Institution, BSTI, are not really accepted by many countries in Europe or other countries. Even in India, we had serious issues. So how do you solve it? One process is that, of course, the standard authorities' capacity has to be increased. They need to be upgraded to the international levels. That is one thing. Second is that whether you can actually come up with what you call this Memorandum of Understanding, MOU, or MRM, Mutual Recognition Agreement. I would say mutual recognition agreement is proper word, between the standard authority organizations of the trading countries. For example, Bangladesh's BSTI and Indian BIS, Bureau of Indian Standard, they can actually come to an MRA, Mutual Recognition Agreement, that BIS, Bureau of Indian Standard, will actually recognize the certificates issued by BSTI. So that kind of collaboration is also extremely important when it comes to this compliance. So you can see that there are various layers of compliance and various levels of compliance, which, as I said, even if you don't get into any trade agreement, any FTA, you need to actually, even if you really want to export to other country, increasingly these are becoming more and more important. Okay, so I think there is another question by Ekram. Since the FTA initiatives has been undervalued over the years, when it comes to true implementation, which countries or communities are actually benefited from not having an active FTA with BIMSTEC? Okay, so who are the beneficiaries of the status quo? Of course, there are some beneficiaries, especially the domestic sectors which are heavily protected. They are not competitive enough. They always would like to remain under protection. So, and they will always seek for tariff protection and various other protection. Even some of the sectors, they don't really want to go to the export market. So there are cases because they want to live with this under this protected umbrella. So these are the sectors or countries or communities, they can also be kind of the vested interest of this protected environment. Okay, then I'm Jasveer Singh. What is the nature of development partnerships should BIMSTEC countries follow? I thought countries needs to collaborate on development assistance, compact among partners. I think development partnership is definitely a broader framework, a bigger context. It's not only the trade agreement, but you need to find out some broader areas for cooperation. BIMSTEC has the advantage of actually taking the sectoral approach. So even this sectoral approach can be materialized. I think that will really lay down a bigger foundation for broader cooperation. So I think that approach can be pursued, And you know that some of the countries in the BIMSTEC 7 countries, they have been given primary tasks or lead tasks to, or primary tasks to lead some of the sectoral initiatives. Bangladesh has been given this task to take forward this trade and investment. And we really want to see from our Bangladesh trade negotiators, and especially Minister of Commerce, Minister of Foreign Affairs, to what extent they can take this agenda forward. Okay, I think I am kind of, okay, there is another question. Mustafizur Rahman, how do you see the current trade policies among BIMSTEC nations evolving, especially with regard to fostering cross-border investment, sectors of renewable energy and technology? It's interesting because I see that in one of my articles a couple of years back, I wrote that if you look at the success of the ASEAN countries and you just make a contrasting comparison, you see the contrasting picture in South Asia. We see that among the ASEAN countries, there was a convergence of policies, not only the development policies, but macro trade and investment policies. So the countries in ASEAN, mostly they actually tried to converge. So that really helped them having a larger cooperation or integration. In South Asia, and then if you include BIMSTEC as well, you see the countries are moving into different directions. So one country probably they want to follow more liberal trade investment policy. Other countries they don't. So if you don't have your own domestic liberal trade and investment policies, then how do you really go for a unified or in a collaborative framework at the regional level? That's a big challenge. So I think, what I see that in some cases, the countries have really walked backward. Probably COVID played an important role where we see the rise in protectionism, but it's not only COVID, but also some of the domestic politics in South Asian countries. It also actually helped the growing protectionism. And also, I think I mentioned about this new industrial policy, the renewable energy and various other technology, which is also becoming a new reality because of the geopolitics. So it's seen that some of the technology, we need to actually have a control over this technology. There is a global competition there. It is not only in South Asia, but you will see the huge amount of investment done by European Union, US, Russia, China, on these kind of new technologies to actually, with the intention that they want to control that new technology. And if you have this race, then obviously you will not see kind of free trade or even the way WTO tried to make this trade regime, global trade regime, more rules based. You will see that the rules are being violated more and more. You remember this trade war between US and China that violated the WTO rules, every time when US imposed tariff on China or China, kind of retaliated. So these things my fear is that we'll see more of this in future. And this particular region, South Asia or BIMSTEC, they will not be free from the impact of those war or race at the global level. Amit, Amit Mandal asked that, said agro-based investment, what type of investment is required, if public or private, so that farmers can benefit directly? Is there any policy being struck for farmers from trade? This is an extremely important question, especially with this agro-processing. Most of the BIMSTEC countries, if you see that they have a very important, a large agricultural sector. But except Thailand, because probably Thailand was not a South Asian country, that's why Thailand did not follow this South Asian tradition. So we see that in Thailand, the way this agro-processing industry flourished, especially the way, it's not a rocket science. It's a kind of low investment, but I think they made this agro-processing industry successful by improving the capacity of the exporters or producers, the way I explained earlier, improving the capacity of the certificate issuing agency, trying to improve their overall national standards. So, so that all the exporters or producers, they comply with the standards, and then they became globally competitive. So this is something very important that this whether we can learn from Thailand. There is a way we should learn from Thailand. They are based on the success what they have achieved in the agro-processing sector. Okay, and you also asked about Amit, that whether is there any policy by BIMSTEC for farmers from trade. I don't see any explicit thing there, but I see there are areas for agricultural cooperations, and more importantly, I think if they can focus on these areas, particular areas, that there are problems at the policy level, problems at the infrastructure level, problem at this standard compliance issues. All these need to be looked into more from a kind of holistic approach rather than a very segmented approach. Ikram, what are the adjustments needed to reach the level of understanding that currently exists between France and Germany to the countries like India or Pakistan Bangladesh? So this, Ikram, you should do this research, because you are the young set of people, and you should do this research how Germany and France they succeeded to reduce their bilateral tensions and come under a single umbrella, having an open, one single office for their embassy. We can't think of that in South Asia, that India and Pakistan having a joint embassy somewhere. So probably that is something probably we have to wait for long. But we should not be kind of make it a kind of a light case, because there is an example that even after Second World War, these two countries, they fought against each other. The way we know that all history is there, but how they could reduce their tension, and they became the leader actually in European Union. If you identify two countries who are the leaders of European Union, this Germany and France, they are the leaders of the European Union. And you see that if any European country, a member of European Union, they fall into any problem, these two countries appear as the leader to solve the crisis. Greece is the example where these two countries were very active in solving the crisis. Okay, so Ikram, I leave it to Ikram to develop a model how this regional tension can be solved. Okay, Shurit asked a question about agriculture trade. There is the export basket of the agro products of the countries among the BIMSTEC region, other than India and Thailand, is well constitute the one country. How important is the export diversification of these countries? What would be your suggestion? Export diversification extremely important, extremely. As I mentioned earlier, that these countries, they need to diversify the export basket and move towards more value-added products, more complex products. One example is Vietnam in front of us. Vietnam, in some of my articles, I have also talked that if you look at the starting point of both Vietnam and Bangladesh in the mid-80s, they had almost the same starting point. In the mid-80s, Bangladesh's per capita GDP was higher than Vietnam's. Bangladesh's export and Vietnam's export was almost the same size. Bangladesh's FDI and Vietnam's FDI had almost the same size. But now Vietnam has 5 times export than what Bangladesh does. Vietnam's FDI is probably around 10 times what Bangladesh receives in the FDI. So you see that since mid-80s until now, Vietnam made it possible. They became kind of champion in garments, champion in footwear, champion in electronics as well, agro-processing. And it's not only the resources. Sometimes I think we talk quite a lot about the resources, that we are poor countries, we don't have enough resources for diversification. But I think the first and foremost question is that whether we have the right kind of policies, and then whether we have the capacity to implement those policies. Probably on policies and papers, many policies we see that countries like us, excellent policies are there, export policy, industrial policy, fantastic. But when it comes to implementation, the kind of implementation capacity of the state, and then you get into this bigger political economy discussion, actually there is a serious lacking there. And I have written quite extensively on that in order to address the diversification problem, export diversification problem, we need to actually have this approach to solve the policy and regulatory issues, at the same time enhance the capacity of the state to to solve this problem. Okay, so Shurit, I don't see any other question. Anyone wants to ask any further? Okay, there is
We
one
have
more question.
one more question, sir.
Tosif, okay, how would BIMSTEC integrate into the WTO principles such as MFN, the regional power outside of the alliance? How could China affect this alliance? Okay, China affects this alliance. It's not directly, but indirectly. If you look at all these countries, China is the largest, probably the largest trading partner for all these member countries, even for India as well. So when trade becomes a major tool of bilateral relation, then definitely China has some influence there. But apart from this trade, we know that China has its BRI, China has its infrastructural development programs as well. So that will also have some effect. And also bilateral political relation of China with some of the countries in this region will have some effect on this integration process. But this WTO principles and MFN, I think I think the BIMSTEC, all the BIMSTEC members except Bhutan, I'm not sure about Myanmar, if I'm not wrong. They are all the members of WTO. So definitely they are following this MFN principle. So I don't see any problem there. MFN principle is being followed by all countries. Okay. Shurit, over to you. If there is no question.
Thank you so much, sir, for your insightful presentation, and after that, the question answer session. As we are addressed all the questions. Now we can move forward to our next session. Before that, I would like to thank you again, sir, for your session, and we can take a short break. After that, we will start our session. Our next session will start at 3:45 p.m. Bangladesh time. We will wait till then. The session will be on macroeconomy and BIMSTEC, which will be conducted by Dr. Bishwajit Nag. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. I'm also sharing the presentation here, the PDF file. Just let me share that so that what is that? Yeah, just I'm uploading it. Okay, so I have shared that. I think it will take a little bit of time to be uploaded. But thank you so much, everyone, for excellent questions. And we look forward to engaging with you more through this platform and new programs as well. So we'll take a break now.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, everyone.